Hello, hello, everybody. I'm Secular Spirit, and welcome to yet another live review of a debate on religious topics. I'm really looking forward to this one. And thank you to anyone who's joining me live right now. So I see in the live chat we have Spacelia joining, saying, I'm skipping watching Taylor Swift live stream, so I'm hoping this is going to be fun. That's that's a high benchmark for me to try and reach, Taylor Swift, but I'll do my best. So yeah, welcome everyone. I'm looking forward to this one, and I hope we actually get a debate this time. I don't know if any of you checked this out, but I did do a debate analysis a few weeks ago with a friend of the channel, Apostate Aladdin, and it was a debate between Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Richard Dawkins over Hirsi Ali's recent conversion to Christianity. And it didn't turn out to be much of a debate. It was more like a very repetitive conversation. Maybe you could argue that debates are sometimes like that too. So yeah, I'm hoping there's a bit more of a back and forth on this one. And the subject of this debate, and I've linked the full debate in the video description below, and we're going to be going through it right now, today and tomorrow, because it's almost 2 hours long. Figured it's a bit too much to go through in one sitting. The topic is the Bible true? And the participants are Alex O'Connor, who some of you might know as Cosmic Skeptic, a very well-known atheist YouTuber. I've been a fan of his for a very long time. I haven't really covered him on the channel much so far, so I figured this would be a good opportunity. I really like his style. He's very engaging. He really cuts to the point, and some have criticized him for being a bit too nice and forgiving when sharing the stage with Christian apologists, and I can definitely see their point in some of the things I've seen him do. For example, he did a recent interview with Jordan Peterson, which I really enjoyed, but I feel like he could have put Peterson's feet to the fire a bit more. Um, but he has addressed that criticism, and he has said that he's been trying to be less adversarial, and I think there's both pros and cons to that. So let's see how it goes here. And his opponent in this debate, which is being hosted by Pangburn, I think it took place about a month ago. So his opponent is Dinesh D'Souza. So Dinesh D'Souza, I don't know much about him, I must confess. I'm really going into this debate blind. I'm going to be reacting to it live, seeing things for the first time. And the only thing I really know about D'Souza is he's an American political commentator. I know he's done a few documentaries criticizing people like Barack Obama. He's definitely right wing, and I know he's been criticized for his approach in those documentaries. I haven't seen them. I don't really know much about what he's about, so interesting opportunity to learn more about him as well here. I didn't even realize he was Christian, so yeah, learning a lot here. And the thing that has me the most intrigued is the question, the subject of this debate: is the Bible true? And I'm very curious to see how they figure out or determine what they mean by the truth here. So I know that there's some people who are, biblical literalists, I guess you could say, who believe everything that is talked about in the Bible actually happened. So the story of Adam and Eve being cast from the Garden of Eden, cast out of the Garden of Eden, and Jonah being swallowed by a whale and all that sort of stuff. And then there's the ones who believe they're more like metaphorical truths or stories with essences of truth within them. So something like the story of Adam and Eve and taking the fruit from the tree of knowledge is a metaphor for the truth of our inner corruption as human beings. So let's see what they think about that. And it's interesting to me because I'm a former Muslim, and coming from this as an outsider, I think the big difference between Christianity and Islam, I mean, there are a lot of big differences, but one key big difference is the treatment of their holy books. So when you're a Muslim with the Quran, you're kind of beholden to believing that it is the perfect, unerring word of God. So if something is in it, then it has to be the truth. And Christians, depending on the kind of Christian you're talking to, aren't as shackled to the Bible. I mean, it isn't believed to be perfect. The writers are supposedly divinely inspired by God. So I think there's a lot of wiggle room to say, okay, well, maybe this was a metaphor, maybe this was inaccurate, maybe this was a misunderstanding, or maybe there was an essence of truth in it, as I explained earlier. So I'm curious to know how much of an importance do Christians give to the Bible being true or not in their personal beliefs. I could see some thinking it's really important and some not caring at all. And I've met Christians like that who kind of just take whatever they want from the Bible, ignore the rest, and say, it's just a book of wisdoms, in a sense. So, for any of you who wants to vote, if you'll check out the live chat, so you'll find a poll question: Is the Bible true? And you've got three options there: yes, no, and as I talked about earlier, it depends on what you mean by truth. So feel free to vote there. We've got a few votes in already. No is the winning vote thus far for is the Bible true? And I should also mention before we get going, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. All right, everyone, thank you for joining me live, whoever's in here. I see Gerwalk as well. Good to see you as always. Let's get this show rolling.
Without further ado, please welcome to the stage Alex O'Connor and Dinesh D'Souza.
Thanks, Travis. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm not really used to doing this kind of thing without a moderator, but we've had a conversation before coming out here, and we thought it would be good to sort of give each other 10 minutes each to lay out something of a case. We're not going to be too strict with that, but and then hopefully most of the time we can dedicate to just having a chat. Dinesh said that I can go first, which seems a little odd given that he's, I suppose, technically on proposition, but I wanted to lay out a few different ways that I interpret the question and see where he wants to take it. Some people said that I shouldn't do this debate with this question. It's kind of an impossible question. It's the kind of question that requires more of an explanation to ask than to answer, which is a little bit strange. So I thought, the Bible is not a book. It's a library, and like any good library, it contains an amalgamation of different genres. And so asking if the Bible is true, you might as well ask if the corpus of Shakespeare is true. It sort of betrays a misunderstanding of how people interact with the text. So I thought, will Dinesh argue that the Bible is literally true, historically true, allegorically true, morally true, theologically true, metaphorically true? And I suppose the only thing for it is to sort of try each one on for size. So maybe beginning with Genesis, in an attempt clearly not at historicity, but rather allegory and metaphor, we can deal with one of our types of truth here. We're introduced to Adam and Eve, who are told in no uncertain terms by God not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You may begin to wonder why knowledge of good and evil is such a bad thing, but the thought is interrupted by the introduction of the serpent, who says to Eve, did God say that if you eat of the tree, then in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die? And Eve says, yes. And the serpent says, well, that's not going to happen. God just knows that if you eat of it, you'll become like him, knowing good and evil. And he doesn't want that. That's all. You're not going to die. So Eve famously takes the fruit, eats some, gives some to Adam. And what happens? Do they die in the day thereof? Some people say in a metaphorical sense, yes. We'll get to that in a second. But at least on the surface of it, no. What does happen? God tells us himself. He says, now the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and eat from the tree of life, lest he inherit eternal life. And with this, Adam and Eve are banished from the Garden of Eden. So who's telling the truth here? This story is quite mystifying to me, and I'm not the first to point this out. There's actually an apocryphal gospel discovered near Nag Hammadi in Egypt in the 1940s, dated into around the 2nd or 3rd century, called the Testimony of Truth, a gospel that didn't make it into the New Testament, which identifies the serpent, interestingly, who's never called Satan in the text, by the way, identifies the serpent with Jesus. I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but it does seem that the sort of allegorical truth of the story leaves a lot to be desired. I'm told that maybe Adam and Eve died a sort of spiritual death, or mortality entered the world. But then we need to ask why it is that God had to proactively banish them from the Garden of Eden. This isn't some natural result of sin that, mortality entered the world. They're banished. And the implication is that they could have just as easily reached out and eaten from the tree of life, but God didn't want this to happen. So he guards the gates of Eden with a cherubim, with a flaming sword. I find this quite strange, and I'd like to know what Dinesh thinks of it. Moving on quickly, I suppose, to the events of the later Old Testament, skipping over Exodus, we're introduced to another form of truth that I want to potentially engage in, and that's the concept of moral truth. That's another one that I spoke about in the beginning just there, the concept of moral truth. When we look at some of the...
Just to pause a little briefly here. So what Alex O'Connor is pointing out very well here from the beginning, and it's something that made me question, why would he want to do this debate with such a vague general title in the first place, is what are we talking about in truth here? So we do have the basic factual literal truth of today is a Thursday, and then we have allegorical truths like I was talking about earlier, where the actual literal truth isn't what matters. What matters is the essence of the story. And then we're jumping now to moral truths, and that's really something that can be very subjective, or if you're religious, typically you think that there are objective moral truths. So it's really, really kind of murky. And I always wonder this about the people who structure these debates, because there's an element of it where they're clearly just trying to get attention with perhaps inflammatory titles, and I could see how Is the Bible True being one that would attract a lot of interest. But you have to balance that with having an actual good framework or foundation for being able to debate something. And I can already sense that this might be a very muddled thing depending on how Dinesh D'Souza handles it. So right now, Alex O'Connor is just trying to make sure he has all his bases covered with all the various truths. Let's let him continue.
Military conquests of the Old Testament. Bear in mind that the promised land pledged to Abraham is not an empty plain. Its indigenous inhabitants had to be, shall we say, displaced by a series of military campaigns ordered by God and carried out by his prophets. Thus, we have such commands as in Deuteronomy, chapter 20. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. Sounds promising to start with. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. Some peace. If they refuse to make peace and engage you in battle, which, why would they do that on these terms? Lay siege to that city. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, and the livestock, and everything else in the city, they get to go... You may take these as plunder for yourselves, that's right. And you may use the plunder the Lord your God gives you from your enemies. Likewise, in 1 Samuel, we have the destruction of the Amalekites. There's the order, now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. I'm told sometimes that this is actually an exercise in hyperbole. God didn't mean everyone. It continues, do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. And if you think that this is hyperbole, consider what happens when Saul does conduct the destruction of the Amalekites as ordered, and decides to leave alive the king as well as some of the best of the livestock. He leaves them alive. For this small act of mercy, God responds by saying to the prophet Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king because he's turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. So not even the animals can escape this genocide. So I'd like to ask Dinesh, I suppose, directly, which is it? Is this a morally corrupt series of events, or do I have to dispel with my moral intuition that genocide, including of innocent children, is a bad thing? There's plenty more to talk about in that regard. I don't want to take up too much time. This isn't...
So here's another way of looking at it. Could there, when he mentions hyperbole and the defense that some apologists have for things like this, well, it was exaggerated. So you could also have truth in the sense of when people say, oh my God, it was so hot today, my skin literally melted. So obviously their skin didn't literally melt, but in that exaggeration is a truth of how hot it felt. So yeah, maybe the wrath of God or the lesson you need to take from the story is so important that the exaggeration, while not exactly true, conveys this important moral truth. It's the same kind of thing where maybe some parents might tell kids, don't go into the basement, there's a boogie monster there who'll eat your feet, or something like that. There isn't actually one, but what's most important is that they don't go into the basement because it's dangerous or whatever. So we could be dealing this level of truth as well.
Of course, to mention the advocacy and explicit instructions around slavery in the Old Testament. Hopefully we can get onto those too if we want to go down the moral path. But I think that the most natural interpretation of the question is the concept of historicity, the literal truth of the Bible, that is. This is where I think we have to move to the New Testament, because the genre of the Gospel seems to be historical biography, unlike the mythology of a book like the Psalms or Genesis or Job. And here there's a lot to talk about. We begin with the birth narratives. There are two birth narratives in the Gospels, in Matthew and Luke. Both give different accounts. Both have a genealogy of Jesus, for example, but the genealogies are different. I'm told this is because one records Mary's genealogy and one records Joseph's. You can do this if you like. It doesn't seem like the most natural reading of the text if you're not already predisposed to synchronize the accounts. Then we have, for example, the flight to Egypt, which is only recorded in Luke, which is difficult to reconcile with Matthew's account that they went to the temple in Jerusalem instead. But more importantly, Matthew then says that the family traveled to Nazareth, and he says, "So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he shall be called a Nazarene," quoting the prophets. Now you'll notice if you read an online Bible that where the Old Testament prophets are quoted, there's a little footnote telling you what the prophecy is. In this case, you won't find one, because the prophecy simply doesn't exist. It's not there. There's no such thing. So there are two options here. Either Matthew made up this prophecy or got it wrong, in which case the New Testament is mistaken, or the prophecy does exist, but for some reason fell out of our scriptural tradition and now no longer exists, which makes the accuracy and at least the completeness of the Old Testament suspect. So again, I'd like to ask directly which it is. Finally, I suppose I should mention the contradictions that a lot of people point to in the Gospels. Some of these, I think, are legitimate, some are not. I'll give you some examples very quickly of Gospel contradictions that I do think are real contradictions. First, the date of Jesus' crucifixion. Was it before the Passover, as John states, or was it after the Passover, as the Synoptic Gospels state? Second, Jesus is sending out his disciples to teach. In Mark, he tells them to take nothing with them except a staff. In Matthew and Luke, he says, take nothing with them, including no staff. So do they take a staff or do they not? A pedantic contradiction, but a contradiction nonetheless, and one that's led people like Barnabas, Ahern, to write entire articles on this. And Augustine himself actually distinguished between a literal staff and a metaphorical staff to explain this difference. Anything, I suppose, except considering the possibility of even the most minor of gospel contradictions. Third, Jesus flipping the tables at the temple. A famous story, but did you know that in the Gospel of John, this takes place at the beginning of Jesus' ministry? In the Synoptics, it takes place near the end. So when did that occur? Mary Magdalene, after the resurrection of Jesus, runs to the disciples in John's Gospel and says, they've taken the Lord, and we do not know where they have put him. Strange thing for her to say if, as the Gospel of Matthew recounts, she's visited by an angel at the tomb who tells her exactly where Jesus is going, and then she's met by Jesus herself on the way to the disciples to bring them the news. Strange for her to then say that they've taken the Lord and we do not know where they've put him. There's more to say on this. Interpolations, things which seem not to be in our oldest manuscripts but end up in newer manuscripts of the New Testament, such as the adulterous woman, let he who is without sin cast.
So again, these are the kinds of things like I was talking about earlier, where if you're a Muslim and you point out just direct contradictions in the Quran, it's really problematic because it's supposed to be the perfect, unerring word of God. And for things like contradictions like this, what I've heard from some Christians that I've met is that, well, it could just be that one of the authors was wrong. There might have been a mistranslation at some point. So it's human error. It's not God's fault. And then there's others who I've seen online say that, well, it's the duty of each Christian to just interpret and engage with the text to figure out what the correct answer is. And that's part of the journey towards truth. But the truth is still in there. So again, I look at it from the same point of view that I think Alex O'Connor is, where I think we have to start with just historicity, just looking at it the same way we look about facts and truth in our day-to-day lives. Like I was mentioning earlier, today's Thursday, a day is 24 hours long, and Trump was elected president in 2016 or 2017. Gonna have to fact check that, but basically those are the best ways of looking at it, and the Bible fails on a lot of those standards, so it's really hard to figure out what we're meaning by truth here. And I liked a few of the comments in the live chat. So Space Elliot, when talking about hyperbole, it feels like exaggeration is better to put it in when it's not about life or death. Very good point. And Potato Apostado, good to see you. You'd think God's word would make the difference clear. And Peppa has an interesting perspective here, that these stories are nation-building myths. So you could argue that there's truth in myths as well. Myths that unite people based on region and ethnicity. So again, all of this is just indicating that the truth isn't so simple when we're dealing with the Bible, or should I say with people who want to defend the Bible.
Cast the first stone. Most scholars agree that this was not in our earliest manuscripts and was added in at a later date. And if we can see that the gospel stories were edited after they were written down, there's no reason to think that they couldn't be edited before they were written down as oral traditions too, as well as the entire ending of Mark 16. There's a longer version and a shorter version, because the longer version simply isn't in our earlier manuscripts. These documents don't seem to have the historical reliability either. So in conclusion, I've probably spoken for too long here. Are we talking about allegorical truth, moral truth, metaphorical truth, theological truth, historical truth? I suppose what I want to say to Dinesh is take your pick, and I'll probably have something to say about it.
All right. Here we go. If you don't mind, I'm going to stand up. Is that okay?
Please.
Okay. I'm standing up because I want to kind of neutralize Alex's accent advantage. I mention this because it seems to me no accident that so many of the prominent so-called new atheists have British accents. I think this is really important to their credibility, because think of it, if Hitchens and Dawkins and Alex were three Southern boys from Louisiana, would they have quite the same impact? I'm not sure. Anyway.
Oh my God. This is an awesome start. So you're given only 10 minutes to do your opening speech or whatever. And well, Alex O'Connor brought up a lot of very good questions, and he devoted almost the first minute to it, to just making a joke about the new atheists mostly having British accents. I don't even know what to think of that. Maybe it's just, an attempt at, folksy charm to win over the audience, or is it a sly dig at his credibility, saying, oh, well, he's got the accent, so it just sounds fancier when he talks. But anyway, it could just be for humor.
Anyway, this is why I'm standing. I was a little puzzled about this topic and kind of how to get at it, because I've never debated this topic before. I'm not a theologian. I wouldn't even say I'm an expert on the Bible. I'm, I think, a believing and intelligent Christian. And so I have done a bunch of debates over the existence of God, over can God's omnipotence and benevolence be reconciled with evil in the world. Those topics appear to be philosophical topics. But when you're dealing with the Bible, you have a different kind of a work altogether. And I say this because in discussing if something is true or false, you have to ask, what is it that the book is doing? Like, what's its purpose? What is it there for? Let's take an example of what I mean. Let's say if we were debating, is Shakespeare's Julius Caesar true or false? Now, Julius Caesar is a historical account. This is not one of Shakespeare's works of fiction. It's a historical drama. But because Shakespeare's interest is in drama, he emphasizes dramatic events and dramatic confrontation. He does not actually worry about trivial details, anachronisms. If an event occurs over here, Shakespeare does not hesitate to pull it in over here because of the dramatic impact is more powerful this way. And so imagine if someone were to come along and say, well, this is untrue because when one of the conspirators shows up to commit the crime, he is, according to Shakespeare, wearing a handkerchief. Well, handkerchiefs didn't really exist in the time of Julius Caesar. This is obviously something Shakespeare got right out of Shakespearean England, stuck it right in there, didn't care about doing that because his purpose is something else, to explore the nature of tyranny, for example. And so to bring the lens of saying this is anachronistic, well, you may or may not be right, but you're like missing the point of the whole book.
Okay, I do want to let him finish just making his point, although I think we can sense where he's going with this. Basically, says it's a fictional drama that shouldn't be taken as a history lesson, talking about Julius Caesar. So he's going to connect this to the Bible somehow. So let's see how he does it. And I just want to also say hi to Nasheen. Thank you so much for joining. This might be a spoiler preview for some of you, but Nasheen says, just watched this last night with a Christian friend, and it got him questioning. So what exactly does Dinesh D'Souza do or not do in this to get your Christian friend questioning?
And you're also missing the point of the author, and you're missing the point of the reader. Meaning the author's intention is not to worry about whether or not people in ancient Rome used handkerchiefs. The point of the author is to dramatize something about the essence of tyranny and conspiracy, and maybe the conflict between tyranny and freedom. And readers of the work, understanding that, have always taken it in that spirit. So, as I listen to Alex, I think to myself, let's think about the Bible, what kind of a book it is. Well, first of all, it is a book that exists sort of within a tradition and within a church. I mean, there was no Bible for 300 years, right? The early Christians get together in the 4th century, they put the Bible together. Now, there's already a flourishing church. In fact, right about that time, the Roman emperor will convert to Christianity. Christianity will become the state religion of Rome. And the Bible will become, this assembled Bible will become the handbook of this church. And so it is to this day. Now, that's one point. The second point is that the Bible is a very strange book to be asking this kind of a question about, because the Bible nowhere admits the legitimacy of this kind of inquiry. It's worth noting. The Bible is a book of declaration, I would say of revelation. It never tries to prove anything. It could, but with very rare exceptions, and even those exceptions are generally kind of feeble, it is a book of sort of bold proclamation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Boom. It's declared as something true. Now, I want to reflect on that for a moment. Before I do, let me say, if you think about that sentence by itself, it's a puzzle. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Obviously, somebody is writing this. But who? No one was there except God. And yet, the sentence does not say, in the beginning, I created the heavens and the earth. There's apparently an observer. And the observer is recording, and God is, in fact, in the narrative. God is, in fact, the subject of it. In the beginning, God created. the heavens and the earth. So as I think about this statement, I think that first of all, it is an astounding claim, completely counterintuitive. And by counterintuitive, I mean, well, I get most of my intuitions from Aristotle. Aristotle, using you could call it philosophical common sense, says the universe has always been around. It's always been here. You don't need an explanation for how it got started because it never got started. It's always existed. And the Greeks also believed, as you probably know, out of nothing can come nothing. So therefore, if you first had nothing, how can you get a universe? The Bible goes against this Greek tradition and states categorically, as a matter of fact, that first there was nothing, and then there was a universe because God made it. So there are some factual assertions here. The assertion that the universe had a beginning, the assertion that the universe, in a sense, came out of nothing, and of course, the assertion that the universe was created by God. So we can, if we want to go down this road, I'm not going to do it right now, explore whether this astounding claim that was made by the ancient Jewish writers with no evidence at all, no empirical investigation, no scientific experiment, no attempt to measure the redshift of galaxies. Nevertheless, the ancient Hebrew writer says, we know this to be true because God told us. And now here we are, more than 2,000 years later, really more like 3,000 years later, and we're in a position to ask, is this claim true? So I'll defer that. I'm happy to discuss that, and probably will. But this is one way to think about whether what the Bible says is true. It's making these categorical assertions. And most of these assertions, I would argue, are in the domain of revelation. The Bible is, in fact, a revelation. A revelation. Right here we have a problem, because how does one approach a revelation philosophically? Alex, you just tell me when I'm out of time. Okay, I'm just gonna go.
Okay, he's just gonna keep going. Okay. I tried to just like let him speak so I could just see where he was going with this. And I mean, you can help me out in the live chat, but my understanding was he's saying there's a few truths that he wants to talk about. So one element, and this is tying back to the Julius Caesar thing, is the literal truth isn't what's most important about the Bible. It's taking little bits and pieces and then talking about certain things that are important. So I think this is what Alex O'Connor was referring to as allegorical truth. And, you know, it's not meant to be like the kind of truth that you have, again, in a textbook or something, or like, you know, today is Thursday. But now he's conceding also that there are some things that are just categorical, literal truths, like literal claims, the universe having a start and God creating it, so on and so forth. So what I'm curious to know here is which of those two things is what's most important to someone like Dinesh? What's the most important thing to defend? Because I think if we're going to have this debate, we need to figure out, like Alex needs to figure out what thing to address, although he seemed happy to address a few of them. And Spacelia had a good comment here that I think the Bible authors had different goals than Shakespeare. Well, maybe the Christian would say, well, they're both trying to hint at universal truths in a sense. So I'm not really sure about that. Yeah, maybe it is the case. And a few more details from Nasheen about her Christian friend. I'm just going to share this with everyone because I'm curious to learn more. So the Christian friend said this is the first time he realized how, to a believer, no matter how weak the arguments were, it felt right because of Dinesh's confidence and personal bias, and that helped him realize his own inner bias. And I agree with Drusilla, that's a great start. And yeah, Michael, so allegorical truth, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Actually, what is the allegory what is the message of Goldilocks? I've always wondered about that. Don't break into people's homes. I feel like there has to be more than just that. And yeah, so Nasheen just finishes off by saying, after debate, he asked me why I left Islam, and a lot of my experience resonated with him as he saw how similar the religions are. He was honestly a bit scared to be able to relate to me. So I wish your friend the best, Nasheen. If you have any more details to share, I'll be happy to just share them with everyone watching. But I suppose let's let Dinesh finish.
Until you stop me.
3 minutes, I think.
I'm okay?
3 minutes or so.
I got 3 minutes. Oh, wow. It's just getting started. All right. I'll save some of my stuff. But let me just say this. What is the point of revelation at all? We have a guy here who says he's a cosmic skeptic. Many of you probably think you're skeptics. And so
why the quotation marks and skeptic? It's very dismissive once again. First with the accent, now this.
So you might ask, well, why the heck do we need revelations? We have reason. Well, turns out that here we are flung into the world. And if we reflect upon this fact and reflect upon our place in the world, several important questions pop out that are the inevitable result of reason, but which reason is utterly incapable of answering. Not that reason has an answer to date. Reason cannot answer. What are these questions? 1, why is there a world? 2, what is our purpose in it? Why are we here? 3, what happens after we die? 4, is our passionate concern with justice, with morality, with goodness, that is constantly betrayed in the actual life of the world, ever cosmically vindicated after the world or beyond the world? So I could go on, but I'm giving you 4 straightforward questions that no intelligent person, I think, can avoid having to raise, and yet to which there is.
So I agree. These are really important and for many people very troubling questions. And I think those questions are the reason why so many people are religious. And it's probably the reason why religions came to exist in the first place, to try and answer those questions. And I suspect what Dinesh is going to get to in a second is that you can't really answer those questions just through pure skeptic reason. So let's see what he says.
No available or even conceivable answer. It's not as if there's no answer, but we'll get an answer tomorrow. Because let me put it this way. Let's take the question about life after death. And I'll close on this and open the door to further inquiry. Let's talk about life after death. Is there life after death, yes or no? Shakespeare says that death is the undiscovered country. No traveler who has gone there has ever come back. I think we probably have to agree with this. You might get some tiny hints from like near-death experiences, but by and large, we don't know. And not only do we not know, we have no way of knowing. The key point here is that probability, the absence of evidence is the evidence of absence. This is all gobbledygook. Because all of this is only based on prior experience. If you show me a guy and tell me he has 3 eyes, I won't believe you. Because I've seen thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, and I've got a lot of experience, and based upon that, the probability that a guy can show up with 3 eyes may seem to me to be pretty low. But the question of life after death, if I think of an analogy for it, it's something more like the possibility of aliens. It's not even an exact analogy, but it's a similar analogy because if I say to Alex, you believe in aliens, there's no probabilistic way to say, yes, we have nothing in our experience to go this way or that way. And here's my point. It is exactly when reason not only breaks down, but reason can't even go there, that revelation steps in and delivers an answer. And here we are debating, is that answer true? And the question I want us to think about, at least to get started tonight, with what tools are you going to deliver a true or false verdict on subjects that are outside the domain of reason itself? I mean, Immanuel Kant says on the first page of the...
Yep, we got to it, didn't we? You can't use reason to answer those questions. So here's the problem that I really hope that Alex O'Connor brings up about this is we need to have some kind of standard, some kind of framework to assess these truth claims beyond, well, it's revelation, it's faith, because we exist in a world where there are contradictory truth claims about the universe and who God is and what God will do to us and what life is like after death, if there is life after death. So, yeah, Michael, imagination delivers an answer. So we do need those standards, and that's why the reason that Dinesh D'Souza is dismissing right now is so crucial, because then we can just believe anything, can't we? And we can't counter anyone else's claims because they'll just say, well, it's divinely inspired, it's revelation, or one wording I've heard from some believers is, I just know it's true. I just feel that it's true. And imagine a whole world where everyone just had differing beliefs based on that. Imagine our society operating in that kind of way for the most important questions, by the way, like he was mentioning. Why are we here? What happens after death? And all that kind of stuff. What is our purpose? And it would be chaos, right? So this is the interesting thing about religious people, I find, is they're willing to suspend their critical thinking in these parts of their lives that frame their viewpoint of everything, but in day-to-day reality, in their normal lives, they don't act that way most of the time. So I think that's the thing that I found as a believer myself. And I just want to also point out that Nasheen's friend, the Questioning Christian, is in the live chat. So you can ask him anything you want right now if you want to in the live chat. Hi, Lip. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoy our discussion of this debate, even though you just watched it. Happy to talk to you afterwards, perhaps in private, but let's keep the show going for now.
The critique of pure reason. Before we discuss the great reach, whether we discuss whether this is reasonable or that's not reasonable and whether this is empirical, because we first got to set the boundaries of reason. What is it that reason can and cannot know? Why? Because what Kant is basically getting at is that once you go beyond the reach of reason, faith is not unreasonable at all. Why? Because you have nothing else. So what I want to emphasize here, and I'm happy to discuss all the specifics we've covered today, or Alex has covered today, but essentially, the Bible is something that is taught in church. It's a tool for ministry, for exhortation, to get people to live better lives, to help them deal with their life in the world. I have never heard a single pastor, for example, and I'm quite sure this doesn't happen in Jewish synagogues as well, going, you know what, let's go out and find the Amalekites of our day and kill them right now. Nobody says that. No one even thinks that. No one reads the passage that way. Nobody reads the passage of the fall in the way that Alex described it. And so we have a little bit of a problem. We got a book. It's a book that exists within a community for a purpose that the community is extremely clear about. This book is used every single Sunday millions of times.
I don't know if that's true, that the community is extremely clear about how it uses the Bible. I think there is a wild and wide level of divergence in how different Christians of different denominations interpret different parts of the Bible. And there are people who look at the story of Adam and Eve in all sorts of ways, and using them to motivate all sorts of ulterior motives. So really weirdly dismissive and oversimplifying there. And again, we're going back to the questions that Alex brought up of what truth are we talking about here? And what we've gotten so far from Dinesh, and I think he's about to close, is, well, there's some concrete truths revealed through revelation, so you can't assess them with reason, and then the rest is allegorical. So I guess my question to Dinesh would be, if I was participating in this, just to kind of narrow down the discussion, is what kind of truth are you thinking about when you tackle the Bible in your personal faith? And how do you know that the Bible is true while the other options, like the Quran of Islam, are not the truth? So let's see if he gets to that.
Times and all around the world. It's used in Protestant and Catholic churches. Obviously, there are interpretive communities that differ on how things can be read and understood. There's also the whole separate question of the relationship of the Old Testament to the New. There's
Again, I think he's downplaying those differences, but let's let him continue.
an old saying that goes that the New Testament is in the Old concealed. The Old Testament is in the New revealed. So the Old Testament and the New exist in a kind of odd relationship to each other. In fact, so odd that one party, the Jews, repudiates the relationship altogether. And from the Christian point of view, the Old Testament is incorporated but superseded by the New. And there are different ways of looking at that relationship, which we can get into. Let me just close by saying this.
Rather a long 3 minutes there.
Oh, it's a rather long 3 minutes.
It's maybe you meant you finish soon in the way that Jesus promised.
No.
to come back
Let
soon.
me pause right here because
and ambiguous soon. But I'd love to question you on some of the things you've already said.
All right,
if you don't mind.
we will put the ball in your court. So I think what's going to happen now is we're going to go into discussion.
Hope so.
Right? Okay. And you're going to ask me some questions. We'll discuss, and I'll ask you some.
Sure. And I'm happy to essentially take the things that I said in my opening statement and slot them in and apply them to the things that you just said right there. So you began by saying that the Bible is a strange book to ask these questions of because of its purpose. I assume you'd agree with me that the Bible is a collection of books rather than a singular text, with different authors, different intentions, and most importantly, different genres. So the first question I suppose I'd like to ask you is, do you agree, for example, that at least some biblical texts are attempts at historical biography, such as in the Gospels?
Of course. I would agree with that, but let me just qualify it this way.
Sure.
When we think of the Bible as revealed, the question now becomes, what do we mean? Did God write the book? Did God inspire the book and human beings wrote it? Did God show human beings events that they then described in their own words? Okay, so the reason these things are important is, it seems to me, to answer the question I raised earlier about in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, the way I understand it is there's a perfect revelation shown to a gospel, to a Bible, to a Jewish scribe who sees it, so to speak, but writes it in his own words. When I look at the book of Revelation, same thing.
And does it get anything wrong? Do those scribes get anything wrong?
It's quite possible that when you say get anything wrong, they are writing it in human terms. I mean,
But I mean the specifically mundane human things. I'm not talking about when the author of Genesis says that God created the heavens of the earth, or talks about the Spirit moving across the face of the water. This is clearly mythological. This is clearly an attempt at mythological writing. That's fine. It would be silly to ask if that's true or not. But when somebody...
I don't think it is mythological writing at all. I think that it is simply... I mean, put it this way. If we were in the year 4000 BC, if we were John the Divine, and let's just say that God showed us in a vision the actual end of the world, right? Sure. Apocalypse. We would then write down the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, death and famine and destruction. We're not engaging in myth making at all. I'm actually writing what I see.
So you think there'll be a 7-headed demon?
Of course not. I'm saying that to me, what I'm seeing is so. Let's just say, for example, it is a thermonuclear explosion
Sure.
of a kind that the ancient Bible writer doesn't even know what it is.
Yeah.
Right? And the consequence of it is death and destruction and famine. He's going to write it down the way he sees it.
But
right?
where's he going to get the 7-headed dragon and the prostitute from?
This is his
like a human attempt to describe a nuclear reaction?
Yes, because when words.
Oh my. We're getting bogged down here, aren't we? And this is how they're starting. I want you to just think back on what the questions from Alex were just like 2 minutes ago, and how they've kind of just lost track and gone into all these side tangents. And I think this is again just related to this subject of, is the Bible true? Because as we're seeing from someone like Dinesh D'Souza, it's like a very muddled concept where there's elements of things that are some kinds of truth, and then others that are lost in all this other stuff. And it really reminds me of things that the Muslim moderate progressive Muslim historian Reza Aslan says about the Quran, and it reminds me of things that Jordan Peterson, who I've referred to as a pseudo-theist, a pseudo-Christian, have said. So just to cap things off, he's saying that the scribes might have had an experience of revelation and then put it into human terms, like this perfect revelation. And so there literally isn't a 7-headed creature, 7-headed dragon, but it conveys something that is very real, put in the words that could be comprehended by the scribe from 2,000 years ago. Can you just hear how muddled that sounds? Space Elia says the prostitute might be easy to get, but the dragon could be a bit harder. And Potato Aposado says, I don't understand. How is it not real, but also not mythological? Yeah, mental gymnastics going on here. And yeah, Peppa says, good Lord, I was into Reza Aslan's work when I was Muslim. So glad I snapped out of it. Well, in the case of Reza Aslan, I'm doing a side tangent now. His beliefs are not really the beliefs that are shared by a lot of Muslims I've met, Muslims I see in the world. So it really is a minority. So Lip says they understand what Dinesh means here. Lip, feel free to share what he means here in the live chat, and I'll share it with everyone. So let's let the conversation go. Oh wait, Lip says it's a literal prophecy, so it's real. Okay. Maybe if they talk a bit more, we'll be able to understand it a bit better.
And images fail. Metaphor is the actual conduit to truth.
Now, I'd understand if that were the case, if you said that perhaps after a nuclear blast, somebody describes it as, the gods of fire descending upon man with their flaming swords or something like that. But like a prostitute and a 7-headed dragon?
Well, first of all, I'm not saying it is a nuclear explosion. The problem is we're given this admittedly phantasmagorical future account, right?
Sure.
It is so wrenching and powerful that many people, for example, have tried to render it by art.
Yep.
And it's not easy to do it.
Okay, Lip, I see what you're saying now. So Lip says the way it's presented is strange because people from the past don't know what things from the future are. So maybe someone who, let's say a hypothetical person from the past, was told to explain what, I don't know, like a skyscraper was, or a plane, a fighter jet, sending down missiles. They might say, oh, this is a dragon, talking about the fighter plane here. This is a dragon that is casting flame from its mouth, just because they have no frame of reference for what the hell this thing is. So maybe that's what he's talking about here. So let's see.
Right? Mm-hmm. It's not easy to do it because we have to stop and realize, first of all, that we're dealing not only with the limitations of perception, but the limitations of language. Let me give you a simple example. I come to America from India. I have never eaten a mushroom. Okay? I ask you, Alex, what does a mushroom taste like?
Sure.
I would submit that you would be completely unable to render to me in words, however lengthy and ornate, what a mushroom actually tastes like.
That may be true, but I was asking, for example, about Jesus' presentation at the Temple of Jerusalem after his birth. This is not like trying to describe a mushroom or the end of the world.
No. Okay, so now let's talk about that.
Hold on a second. This is a historical event that's being recorded by one New Testament writer at the same time as another New Testament writer says that the family had traveled to Egypt. I don't think this is an attempt at metaphor or allegory, as I would say of Genesis. Whether you think that is or not, I would say that in the case of the Gospels, we can agree that in at least some instances, this is a clear attempt at mundane history. This is not an attempt at writing some kind of metaphor to explain a truth that's otherwise unknowable to the human mind. It's a very straightforward attempt to record what actually happened, and they contradict each other.
They contradict each other because they're written by 4 different people.
Sure. So one of them is wrong.
Let me ask you this. If God were writing it, I'm quite sure he would have written it once. You would need 4.
Sure. So,
okay?
So some of them are wrong then?
No. Okay, so when you say they're wrong, let's consider Luke's gospel for a minute.
Yep.
Luke is a medical doctor. Luke is not present at the events being described.
Mm-hmm.
Luke is virtually in the position of Thucydides writing the Peloponnesian War. Now, Thucydides did fight in the war, but in most of the events described by Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War, he wasn't there.
Making them very...
So the question was a very simple one. So are the other writers wrong? So we're getting this anecdote about the Peloponnesian War. Let's let him keep going.
unreliable, right?
No, on the contrary, it is in fact the most reliable account of the Peloponnesian War that historians have.
Let's not say that it is reliable, though.
No, it is. What I'm trying to say is that when you're talking about historicity, and you're talking about historicity now in the ancient world, you have to recognize that these people are not approaching it as modern historians. Luke is going around interviewing people.
So let me ask this very, very straightforwardly then.
Okay.
Luke says that after the birth of Jesus, the family fled to Egypt. Matthew says that they went to the Jerusalem temple. Are they both correct, or is one of them wrong?
Who the heck cares? I mean, look.
Well, I do, and so
Well,
do
you
probably
do,
the
but-
people
but-
who-
but let me-
Wow, this is a really bad dodge. Who the heck cares? So again, this is right out of Reza Aslan's playbook, and I've heard this kind of lesson before about how people in the past didn't record history the way we do now, and they weren't obsessed with getting every basic factual detail correct. So all of this is besides the point. We get it. Okay, they only care about the allegorical truths, but what Alex O'Connor is trying to point out in various ways, and he's not getting an answer from Dinesh, is, well, what about things where they're just like very mundane events and the order is reversed or just different in 2 different accounts? So even if one of them is being allegorical, they're still wrong factually, right? And this is just a complete dodge. Yes, Drusilla, I can't believe it. Who the heck cares? It's like he's afraid of just saying the word, well, one of them is wrong.
Let me say why what you care about is not only trivial, but indicates a kind of unwillingness to try to get what the text is trying to communicate.
I'll tell you why I don't think it's trivial.
See, this is the thing. Even if it is trivial from his perspective, you can still concede, okay, maybe he was factually wrong, but he is conveying the allegorical truth, and they weren't concerned with the truth the way we are now. But he is refusing to concede this point. And did you see the dismissiveness again with the air quotes of saying care? So I think this is the 3rd time I've seen some dismissiveness towards Alex from Dinesh, and I don't like it one bit, because I think Alex is being very generous and very patient so far.
Because I think that the reason why Luke may have invented the flight to Egypt, he tells us. Luke says, when he records the flight to Egypt, and then they return from Egypt, he says, this is so that we can fulfill the prophecy from Hosea chapter 11, out of Egypt I shall call my son. Now, in Hosea, God is talking here about the nation of Israel. At least in this case, unlike the Matthew prophecy, the prophecy actually exists and we can interrogate it. It seems to me like what Luke is doing here is attempting to display Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. And in fact, he tells us that that's what he's doing. Therefore, if it is the case that Jesus didn't go to Egypt and didn't come out of Egypt on his return, then this would undermine Luke's attempts to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. That's why I think it is relevant.
Well, look.
And not trivial.
Right, but I think that
Would you agree with that? I mean, do you think it's a completely trivial point? If it's so trivial,
no, I think that the point,
why
as
is it included in the first
point
place?
as you stated it before, is trivial. The point you're now raising is not trivial, but the point you're now raising is one in which you have 3 centuries of Jewish-Christian disputation about whether Jesus is the Messiah. Okay, and by and large, the disputation breaks down in this way: the Jews are the biblical literalists, and the Christians are the sort of metaphorical readers. And I say this because let's take a very famous passage that bears on this very topic, where Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. And the Jews go, you said the temple would be destroyed. Now, interestingly, Jesus did say the temple would be destroyed, and the temple was in fact destroyed in 70 AD. In fact, 40 years after Jesus said that, the temple was in fact physically razed to the ground, and the Jews dispersed in a huge diaspora. But my point is, Jesus doesn't reply that. Jesus doesn't say, hey, listen, wait 40 years. Jesus says, no, you're misreading me completely. When I said the temple, I was actually speaking of the temple of my body.
He doesn't tell them that.
But this is stated.
We're told that that's what he means.
We're told that's what he means. So what I'm getting at is, here you have a case where you have an event, you have a Jewish literalist reading and a Christian metaphorical reading.
Yeah.
Another example, and
So would you say then the flight to Egypt is a metaphor? Is that what you're trying to say? In other words, I'm trying to understand what it is that you're doing here to actually answer the question that I'm asking you, which is about, because here's my theory, here's an idea.
Okay.
Luke, the author of Luke, invents the flight to Egypt in order to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, meaning that when we read Luke, we should note that where it appears that he's making historical claims, we should note his willingness to twist history in order to fulfill a theological
you don't know
aim.
if he's doing that. You're assuming that. This is your theory.
No. What I'm saying is that that's one.
Anyone catch the 4th dismissive air quote there? And again, to go back, the original question, which is long lost at this point. I don't even think it was the original question, but the question of were the other writers wrong with the contradictory details, and we still haven't gotten down to it. Like this is really bad, and I can see how Dinesh is kind of shifty in this because he doesn't want to concede that point of possible error from these writers of the Bible. And now he's dismissing the theory that Alex O'Connor is bringing up about why Luke might have been motivated to create the story about Jesus' parents and all that. But that's not the point. This is a hypothetical that's trying to bring out how these errors, or the fact that some of these things might not be true, actually do have consequence. And this is something that Dinesh has completely and very annoyingly dismissed.
Thesis to explain the contradiction between Luke and Matthew. If you want to say that it's trivial, then fine, but we still have to explain how it comes about. And what I'm saying is one idea of how this comes about leads to us undermining our trustworthiness of Luke. What I'm asking you for is your explanation that would not lead to us having to undermine the trustworthiness of Luke.
I don't have the ability to referee that passage. I'm not aware of this contradiction. I'll have to go back and look and see.
That's fine.
Go and look it up. But what I am doing is I'm questioning your methodology and your kind of what would I call it? You got the Jews and the Christians arguing about events, and they're very complex events, and they're very powerfully meaningful events. Like let's take, for example, Abraham and Isaac are going up the mountain, and Isaac says to Abraham something to the effect of, where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says to him, God will provide. God will provide. Now, in a Jewish reading, this whole thing has got to be understood in terms of, here's Abraham, he's willing to sacrifice his son, God says stop, it's a tale of obedience. In the Christian reading, it's not that, or it's not only that. The Christian reading is, Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So when Isaac says, where's the lamb? And Abraham says, God will provide, it is a foreshadowing of a significant event in the New Testament. Now, again, as I say, the Jews and the Christians argued this for 3 centuries and more.
So maybe the key point about this is when there are major disagreements, and that's an interesting leap. I didn't know about that, this interpretation of the lamb being a reference to Jesus coming in the future. Maybe we need to have some sorts of standards for determining truth, especially when it comes to the foundational beliefs of what the universe is all about, how it came to be, what happens after death, and all those important questions that Dinesh mentioned earlier on. Maybe we need something besides just faith and looking at these holy books to determine them. Maybe we do need that reason and skepticism that he was dismissing earlier. And again, like, I feel like all of this is kind of besides the point that Alex is trying to make, and you can't really avoid it, that at some point you do have to nail something down as a categorical claim, and you have to address the fact that there's things that don't align in the Bible. And we're kind of circling around it with Dinesh. He's circling around it. He's not really addressing it.
I'm not even trying to adjudicate who's right, but I'm saying you're waltzing in, coming with neither of these two assumptions. In fact, I assume you think that the Old Testament is as mythological as the New.
No.
Okay.
Sorry, that I need to.
And I guess what I'm saying is that people who read the Bible to understand what the Bible is trying to say and what we can learn from it, do what the Jewish rabbis did and do what theologians like Augustine and Anselm and so many others have done. They don't really do what you're doing, which is saying, hey, Luke must have talked to a guy who thought it happened over here, but in fact, this guy says the roof was thatched, but another guy says they let the guy in through the roof who had to be healed. Contradiction. Yep. And I'm like, is this your way of trying to say the Bible is not true?
Yes, it is. The Old
Testament.
Yes.
Okay.
It's precisely what I'm doing. The Old Testament is not fully mythological. I think Genesis is mythological. I think that Exodus makes more of an attempt at history, but has mythological undertones. I think that the military conquests I mentioned in my opening statements are attempts at describing literal historical events. I think that the Psalms are poetry. I think that Job is mythology. I don't think a man called Job actually existed, right? And so there are lots of different genres here. The reason I'm asking about the contradictions in the gospel, and I understand if you don't want to talk about the specific example of Egypt and Jerusalem, fine, whatever. Maybe you can send me an email about it later or something. That's fine. But the reason I bring it up is to say that there are lots of these, and in each case, if we try to look at why they might be contradicting each other, the reasons I think we're given tell us that the historicity of this text should be in dispute. For example, I mentioned the date of Jesus' death. The Synoptic Gospels specifically place this after the Passover meal. They have the Last Supper as the Passover meal.
Okay.
John uniquely sets it before the Passover because he has the theological purpose of wanting to depict Jesus as the Passover lamb.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a contradiction if the Gospels are supposed to be historical accounts of what happened to Jesus, which I imagine if we were having a debate about whether Christianity were true, about whether the God of the Bible existed, you might put forward, say, an argument for the resurrection of Jesus. You might say, well, we have good historical evidence to think that Jesus rose from the dead, and you might point to the story of the crucifixion and the disciples seeing him after he died. This is a common thread. The problem is that if we're treating it as historical in an area like that, then we have to engage with it as a historical text. Why would they contradict each other? I would say for the same reason that Luke contradicts Matthew in the birth narratives, because they're attempting to make a theological point, which tells us at least, and maybe you think that the New Testament is an entirely theological and in no way a historical text. Would you agree at least that the New Testament writers are seemingly willing to adapt the historicity of an event in order to serve a theological point? Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I would agree that
I can see Alex really trying to just have some kind of foundation to then just keep the conversation going, and he gets a yes and no. Again, we can't avoid the importance of historicity in some kind of aspect, and Dinesh is unwilling to even concede it. I don't know how you can proceed from this, and I worry that the rest of this debate is going to be mired in what has been established as the pattern now, where Alex is making certain concrete points And Dinesh is saying, well, you're kind of looking at it from this lens that nobody actually is looking at it when they're believers, and it's too narrow, and it's focused on things that aren't important. And I don't think that's going to be very productive. I mean, let's see what the votes are like for the debate question right now. So is the Bible true? So 14% of you say yes, 63% of you say no, and then a solid chunk, I'm glad I added this as an additional option, 23% say it depends on what truth means. So you can vote for that if you haven't already. It's in the live chat. You can just see it pinned at the top. So please vote if you haven't already. And okay, let's let them go. Let's let them keep going. Yes, Daniel. Things are not always a clear yes or no, but the point that Alex O'Connor is trying to make is that some things have to be, they unavoidably are, especially if we're claiming that the Bible is this guide to life and has the answers, the revelations to all the big mysteries of life.
Well,
I
that
mean,
definitely is a contradiction.
Well, it's not a contradiction because, well, I mean, Thucydides is relaying historical events to make a moral point about the nature of politics, and both are completely consistent with each other.
Sure.
It's not as if Thucydides is, so he's a student of power politics. He is making a point. His speeches are driven at making a point, but the point is excavated out of the actual events. Now, I think that there's a reason that we're given 4 perspectival accounts of Jesus's life. And they're not identical. In fact, as I say, if they were identical, you wouldn't need 4. The point of reading these, and I think the way to read them. Let me say a word. If you want to determine veracity, you have to operate a little bit like a jury, and by that I mean, pick up the Gospel of Mark, the first of the Gospels. Now, by the way, these Gospels are written very proximate to the events they describe. And I say this by the standards of, we're talking about historicity of any historical document.
70 AD, would you say, for Mark?
Yes, I mean, I would say within decades of the events that they describe.
But
yes.
crucially, would you agree with most historians that this happened, for example, after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, thereby allowing the author of Mark to put the prediction in the words of Jesus' mouth without it being anything miraculous?
This is a highly debated point because Mark's gospel leaves off incomplete and has what seems to be at the very end an added section. I don't want to debate that little fragment of Mark. Here's what I'm getting at. If you've never read the Bible, and we've all read the Bible in a way, I was raised Catholic, and so I was habituated to going to Sunday Mass and sort of felt like I didn't know the Bible. I've heard these stories read and so on. But it was a completely different experience for me as an adult to go back with critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through. It has the complete ring of authenticity. And I say this because not only does it give you little details that don't really seem to even belong there. It's clearly not written with a polemical purpose exclusively. Mark will tell you things that not only seem irrelevant.
By the way, I just wanted to comment. Did any of you notice that Alex O'Connor poured water into Dinesh's glass as well as his? That's a mighty Christian of him.
But at other times, undermine what he's trying to say. And that is the true ring of authenticity. Because if someone were to... What's that?
An example?
Well, here's an example. In the Jewish tradition, the testimony of a woman was considered inherently suspect, but the testimony of men generally reliable. And therefore, not that the testimony of women is disregarded altogether, but you needed, for example, many women to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, the Gospels tell us that when Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb, if I were Mark and I were Luke and I were trying to be inventive and I were trying to establish a truth for posterity, I would not have it that a group of, let's just say, hysterical women, Mary Magdalene, whoever it was, a group of women go to the tomb and they're the ones who find the tomb empty. this is like a little dubious because most people are going to go, well, yeah, but women, So here's an example of the Gospels insisting upon a point that would only make sense if that was actually the way it happened.
Allow me to answer that.
Whoa. Is anyone just following what he just shared there? So that's an example. So the resurrection has to be true because, or one of the reasons why it has to be true is, why would they say that it was a bunch of women, especially women of dubious morals, who are the ones who saw Jesus when women weren't considered as trustworthy as men? Haha! It must be true. Yeah, and yeah, Drusilla, yeah, you did notice that you had to throw in the word hysterical there. So Lip says Alex set this one up well. He's about to crush Dinesh's argument. Okay. All right, let's see it.
If I may.
Go ahead.
If I may. This is a commonly presented argument for the historicity of the resurrection, which, by the way, now we're talking as
well. I'm not. No, hold on. I didn't say it's an argument for the historicity of the resurrection. I said it was an argument.
The dodging is beginning already.
And let me say a word.
Okay.
Now we're talking about these texts as if they are historical texts. And the thing about the women is, look, this is quite straightforward to me. Who anoints bodies? Who goes to tombs and anoints bodies after someone dies? It's not men, it's women. And so if the authors of the Gospels had the men go to the tomb to anoint the body, which is what Mary and the other women were doing when they went to the tomb, that itself would be very strange and give us reason to doubt the historicity of the event. In other words, it's like if there's a task that women do, and that task is how Jesus's empty tomb is discovered, then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you said that you need multiple women's testimony. How many women go to the tomb? Multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately after seeing the empty tomb? They run and tell the men who come and verify it for us. Right. So I don't think that this is this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that if this was an invented story, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but if it were, then of course we could expect the people who discover the empty tomb to be women, because it's women who go to anoint the body at the tomb.
Okay, so let's put together what I just said and you just said, and let's ask the question, based upon what you said and what I said, did it happen that way? And I would submit that what you have done, see, you're doing special pleadings. You could argue I'm doing special pleadings.
Ooh, this is not going well for Dinesh, is it? Oh, okay, let's let him finish.
But I would admit that the thrust of the Bible and the thrust of the story is, in fact, aimed at delivering a truth from revelation.
That's fine.
What you're trying to do is saying, all right, I can't contest that because that's outside the domain of reason. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt sort of the nitpicking strategy. And because we got 4 accounts, I'm going to...
hold on. You're the one who brought that up. You're the one who said that
I did.
Women discovering
and I'm saying nothing you've said has even slightly refuted it.
You don't think anything I just said refuted the idea that would be something you wouldn't expect from the gospel authors if it were invented?
No, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I mean, let's look at what we agree on, what we disagree on. You agree that in that culture, the testimony of women in general counts for less.
I think this is something that Josephus tells us, but it's impossible to know what sort of culturally people actually thought at the time. It's impossible for us to know, but I'm happy to grant it. Yeah, sure.
It's impossible for us to know, even though Josephus says it. Okay,
but that's in a court of law, right?
No, but what I'm saying is, if you're applying the is it impossible for us to know, I would suggest to you it is impossible for us to know that it was the absolute and unwavering duty of women to provide all the ointments. You've stated that as a fact.
No.
I would say it's impossible for us to know.
What I'm saying is that if somebody's reading this text and you say, well, if this were invented, why would it be women who discover the tomb? That would be embarrassing for them, the so-called embarrassment criterion. I'm saying, would it not be just, is not the fact that we're told why they're going to the tomb to anoint the body, is this not just reason enough?
No.
I mean, look, I'm not the one claiming I know how this went down, by the way. And also, you just accused me a second ago of special pleading. I wanted to ask you what it was that I'm specially pleading.
That's a really good question. Where was the special pleading? Drusilla also noticed this. What was the special pleading about what Alex said? And I think, roughly speaking, special pleading is when you make an exception to something that's like a general rule without justification. A lot of Christians or theists tend to do this with their various God claims. So, okay, let's see if he explains what the special pleading is, and then we'll analyze this a little bit more.
Well, what I'm saying is that you have an event. These events are described with great precision and a sort of eyewitness presence there. Now, we know in some cases there weren't eyewitnesses, but they're nevertheless described, this is the way it happened. And 4 guys are telling you their point of view, right?
Yeah, none of them the women who actually discovered the tomb, by the way.
No, you're not hearing from the women. I agree. You're 4 male gospel writers, apparently. I lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry.
Because you're scrambling.
I also don't want to get too caught up on this specific example, but I suppose we'll have to sort of leave it with the audience in the live stream. The point that I'm trying to make is that the historicity of at least some of this is important for Christianity. The historicity of the life of Jesus. Like if it were discovered historically speaking that a man called Jesus never existed, that would completely undermine Christianity.
Are you saying important.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Of course I'm not saying
Let me
that.
ask you a different question.
I'm saying that historically it matters. The crucifixion, the resurrection, these are matters which historically matter to Christians. And
so I'm just going to kind of recap this quickly. So I guess we're not going to hear from Dinesh what he meant by special pleading on the side of Alex O'Connor there. But what I think is really important to note here is that Dinesh was trying to show an example of something that, well, this probably is historically accurate, because why would you have the women being the ones who discover Jesus's tomb is empty? I think that's how the story goes. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the live chat. And he's saying, well, why would they say it's women? Wouldn't it be more accurate to say it's the more credible men according to the societal standards? And the point that Alex made, he pounced on this, was, well, so you're saying that accurate historicity actually does matter at least a little bit because you just pointed this out. And then the dodging by Dinesh started. And the thing that Alex also said was, well, isn't it fact enough that women typically are the ones who anoint the bodies? Isn't that enough to indicate that, okay, that's why the women were there? Why do we have to go into this thing of, well, why would it be fictionalized or not that it was the women? Because that's just how it happened to be. So why would it be more dubious? And this is the trap that Dinesh fell into here, because he's claiming that exact specific historicity doesn't matter, and then he's trying to prove that it does actually matter in as important a story in the Bible as this one when it comes to Jesus's resurrection. So where was that special pleading? And Alex, maybe we can see here an example of maybe he's too nice and not adversarial enough. He let it go and he's trying to move on.
So when we're dealing with a historical account of what happened, when they're riddled with contradictions, I think that that's a problem. If you don't think that's a problem, then that's fine. But I think that the people listening and wanting to find out if the Bible is true might see that as reason to undermine the trust of the text.
No, first of all, almost everything that we know about those events in terms of modern historical reliability, for example, where is the site of Jesus's crucifixion? Yeah. Unknown.
Allegedly
disputed. There are a couple of potential sites, but it's not known. What day of the year was Jesus born? Unknown. We think Jesus lived for 33 years, but let's say that one of the Gospels said it was 33 and the other one said it was 34. Do you think that would actually refute Christianity?
No.
No, it would not.
No.
It would actually be quite understandable that you'd have two guys. And they would get that, and they'd be off on that, and this contradiction would be trivial, because the issue is not whether Jesus lived for 33 or 34 years old.
Right, that's a different kind, because if you could tell me that the reason why they had specifically chosen those ages was to serve a theological point, knowing that they're willing to sort of adapt history in order to make a theological point, I wouldn't say that that point alone undermines Christianity. What I would say is that it undermines our trustworthiness in the Bible. I'm not saying that any one of these contradictions can tell us Christianity is false.
No, but I'm saying
firstly, the question is not if Christianity is true, it's whether the Bible is true. It may be the case that a man called Jesus came down to earth, rose from the dead. It's just that the gospel accounts get the details wrong, which mean that the Bible is not correct, but the story that the Bible tells is true. It means that Christianity is true, but the Bible is false. That's perfectly consistent.
I'm simply saying that what you're doing is you are supplying a motive that is completely made up and that I could engage in exactly, let's just take, for example, the 33 versus the 34 years. Now, here's what I'm saying. If there was such a contradiction and I were being you, I would say, oh, the reason that Matthew said it was 33 is because 3 is the number of the Trinity. And so 33 has a certain theological resonance because 3 and 3 gets 33. Hold on.
I don't know how Alex is doing this. This is so frustrating because he is completely missing or avoiding the point. Dinesh is completely missing or avoiding the point that Alex is trying to make here. And that it's very simple, that there could hypothetically be motivations for changing certain details, for changing the historical account of events within the Bible. And I think that's something that, because they are human writers and because there were so many of them over such a long span of time with different motivations, different beliefs perhaps, I think that's inarguable, really. Like to say that there's a possibility, just to clarify. And that's all that Alex is doing. And once you establish that, then you establish that there could be a reason to question the historicity of the Bible. And the thing that's so frustrating to me as well is that Dinesh can concede this. And Alex is showing him the out, that even if we determine this, that doesn't mean that Christianity is false. And it doesn't even necessarily mean that the Bible is false. But it does raise the question of maybe there are some things in it that are not historically accurate. So it's all about raising that question. And Dinesh is very scared to take that step, apparently.
And then I would come around and say, well, the reason the other guy said 34 is actually 3 plus 4 is 7. God made the world in 7 days. 7 is known to be a number fraught with theological significance. And I'm saying, this is basically Alex BS.
Dinesh, the gospel writers tell us that's
Alex
why it
BS. Alex BS. Again, like this is like getting borderline on rude. And Alex is being very patient.
Say that the reason the family went to Egypt was to fulfill the prophecy of Hosea.
Okay, and so you,
so in other words, if the gospel writer, and now imagine that the gospel writers had written what you just said. Imagine in the actual text, one of them said he was 33 when he died because of the number 3 and its significance.
Correct.
And another said that he was 34 because of the number 4 and its significance. That would be a contradiction, and in that instance, not just a historical contradiction, but a spiritual and theological one too.
Actually, no, it actually wouldn't.
Oh, come on.
It wouldn't. I'll tell you why.
You don't think that's a contradiction?
No, it's not a contradiction at all, because the gospel writers are constantly
contradicting each other.
No, drawing, not contradicting each other. If they were constantly contradicting each other, you wouldn't have spent half an hour on a single event that, frankly, I haven't even heard of. In fact, no one's ever heard of. I've never ever heard anyone discuss this in any context. So which event? This prophecy about Hosea. I'll go back and look at all this. But what I'm trying to get at is, if you had a plethora of contradictions, you wouldn't be.
Can you all just look at Alex's face right now? So I'm not a former Christian. I'm not that familiar with the Bible. But my sense from Alex O'Connor's reaction is that this story that Dinesh is claiming that no one knows about, that he didn't know about, is actually a really significant one, biblically speaking. Space Elia, this is how you know Alex is British. a literal facepalm as he's trying to comprehend the dismissiveness of Dinesh here. I don't understand why he's being so evasive about this stuff right now, because as we discussed before, like, you can concede these points and you don't actually lose much ground. It's almost like he's afraid of what the next step will be that Alex will take. But we're not getting to that point because he's sticking with the yes and no. Well, no, I wouldn't. Even when he gave him the very precise example of 33 years old for Jesus, because 3 has a very spiritual importance as a number, and 34 being the age and 4 having the spiritual significance, he wouldn't even concede that.
Spending the entire debate on one that I'm sure no one in the audience has heard of either.
Hold on.
But okay, you've heard of it. Probably because you've been listening to his YouTube channel, right?
You don't think that this is a highly discussed point of contention in the Gospels, the flight to Egypt and its contradiction with
the flight to
Jerusalem
Egypt.
temple.
Look, the flight to Egypt is an important event in the
Okay,
gospel. I'm not saying.
Dinesh, also, you said, why could you only bring up this one example? Take your pick. The date of Jesus' crucifixion, whether they're to take a staff or not to take a staff, the dating of Jesus flipping the tables at the temple, Mary Magdalene and what she says at the tomb, when the temple curtain rips. In the Gospel of Luke, it says that this happens before Jesus' death, and in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, it says that it happens afterwards. Like, we can go through any of these contradictions that you like, but the problem is that what you're going to tell me is that it's trivial, and then when I try to explain that it's not trivial, you say, oh, well, I haven't even heard of it, and no one else really cares about this. When other people do, by the way, this is a highly discussed point of contention in the Gospel. All I'm asking you to do is say that this is, when I mentioned the staff in my opening statement, and I said that whether or not they take a staff is a totally trivial contradiction. I'm not bothered by that. If I were a Christian, I would say, yeah, of course, because the texts are not going to perfectly accord. But for some reason, Augustine could not accept this, and so comes up with this ludicrous idea of a literal staff and a metaphorical staff that Jesus is talking about. If you were willing to just say, yes, this is a contradiction, but that doesn't upset the method of Christianity, I think it would be a much more defensible and respectable approach. But instead, it seems that you're unwilling to admit that there's even a single contradiction in these texts.
I am saying that the texts are written from 4 different points of view.
Do they contradict each
And
other?
it is quite possible that on details, Matthew tells you things that are not in Mark or different than Mark. Contradict Mark.
Contradict Mark.
Yes, contradict Mark. And so the point is, here's my point. You're acting, look at it this way. You would be scoring a point if you could say, God wrote 4 books and they contradict each other. Just like if you're able to say, Dinesh said this in the beginning of the debate and that at the end of the debate, Dinesh is contradicting himself. On the other hand, if we have 2 guys who are here today to go and write an account of this debate, right? And then we look at their accounts, which are authentic, first person, I was their accounts with a lot of detail.
Yep.
And one guy says, for example, the lights were dark. The other guy says the lights were dim. Or one guy says, for example, that Dinesh was sitting at a 45-degree angle. Another guy says it was a 50-degree angle.
Yeah. But
These are
now
not.
imagine,
and then someone goes, Dinesh was sitting at a 43.5-degree angle because he thought this was a way of maximizing his rhetorical effectiveness with the audience. People would be like,
now imagine somebody said, Alex is wearing a blue jacket, and the reason he was wearing a blue jacket, someone said it's a blue jacket, someone else said it's a red jacket. Who cares? You're quite right. But if somebody said specifically, I know that the reason he was wearing a blue jacket was because there's an upcoming election in the UK that's just been announced, and he was trying to represent the Conservative Party. And somebody else said, I know that the reason he was wearing red, and in fact, he told us himself that the reason he was wearing red is because he wanted to support Labour in the upcoming general election in his home country.
Okay, perfect
You would
example.
say, that is a contradiction and means that one of you wasn't paying close enough attention, not just to the color of my jacket, but the very message that I was trying to get across.
That could well be true. But what I'm getting at is we know, just from normal experience, that if the 2 of us are sitting in a cafe and we see an accident, these kinds of differences are normal. So let's just say, for example, here's God showing us a revelation, and the revelation can be whatever it is. And you and I write an account of it, and somebody finds that my account of it not only is different.
So again, and I'm going to address some of the things in the live chat here that Daniel says different people give different perspectives doesn't mean they contradict. Well, with the example of the car accident, and the eyewitness accounts differ, it still matters that one of them or maybe both of them were wrong. It doesn't matter if they were wrong for mundane reasons or whatever, or if we want to talk about things in the Bible, the passage of time, or hearing the story wrong, or a mistranslation, or whatever it is. All of these perfectly reasonable reasons that don't, mind you, that don't question the truth or not of Christianity are totally acceptable. They're totally acceptable reasons to be wrong, and Dinesh is weirdly not conceding this. And someone else in the comments, JJ Soul, makes this point, which I think is a good one to make. There are answers to these supposed contradictions, so maybe there are Christian apologist answers to these contradictions. Dinesh needs to defend his position better or concede he doesn't know the answer, and this is something, as we've seen, he doesn't want to do. And we once again go to this core thing that Alex keeps bringing up, and he's trying all these different ways with the red shirt and blue shirt example to just show that when you look at some of these things, sure, there's allegorical truths, there's other things that are historically accurate and that aren't contradicting, but when you're looking at other things, there is a problem there. And this debate has completely stalled for a good 30 minutes now because Dinesh won't concede this point. And instead, he's working on dismissing Alex in all the ways he can. So he's focusing on things that aren't important, that no one cares about. He's being nitpicky, he's being pedantic. And I don't think he is, because you could argue something like the staff is unimportant, like he was saying. But what matters is it raises the question of why are there these contradictions? And that leads us to the perhaps dangerous question that Dinesh doesn't want to answer, is that this could all be just fictional, or a lot of it could be fictional, and we just have no real good way of knowing what is what. And so we just have to rely on blind faith. And this is something that Dinesh has kind of hinted at, but hasn't expressed very clearly so far.
Than yours, but let's just say, for example, I go, oh, Jesus was wearing a cloak. Another guy goes, he's wearing a robe. For anyone to actually think that this is, in fact, a refutation of the truth of the Bible is ludicrous, So anyway, in our format, we've agreed to do a flip where you've been asking me.
That's not what Alex was saying. It's all about raising the question.
Questions now. Let me ask you something.
If you've got something to ask.
Let me turn around and ask you questions in a sort of what I think is a more fundamental mode, because it gets to what the Bible really is.
Let's hear it.
Do you think that the universe had a beginning?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I would suspect yes.
You suspect yes?
Yeah, sure.
How did the writers of the book of Genesis know that?
I have no idea. If I'm going to be,
they guessed?
If I'm going to be cynical about this, if they did guess, it would be 50-50 guess. And I also think that if we had scientific...
Would it be a 50-50 guess?
Yeah, and it might even be worse than that for you, because if we had some kind of scientific popular hypothesis, because of course the Big Bang might not have been the beginning of everything, who knows, right? But like whatever the popular scientific hypothesis is, if it were pointing to an infinite universe, for example, as Einstein thought we lived in, then I'm sure that people would open Genesis. They would say that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and say that the earth just means the earth itself, right? Like I think it would be equally easily interpretable on either account.
All right. So one of my professors at Dartmouth was Robert Jastrow. He headed the Mount Wilson Laboratory, one of the great astronomers of the 20th century.
Sure.
So Jastrow writes in his book, God and the Astronomers, that for 250 years, modern science has been attempting to discover whether the universe had a beginning. Mm-hmm. And you can think of these scientists as ascending a very tall mountain in which there are many pathways. And for many years, with the steady state hypothesis and so on, there were beliefs that the universe was eternal. It never had a beginning. In fact, that was the prevailing point of view. And then Jastrow argues it's almost as if we reached the top of the mountain and there was a bunch of Hebrew prophets or theologians sitting there who had been there from the beginning. So I'm describing now a true skeptic, and a true scientist describing the scientific shock that attends to a discovery that, and I think it is out of the spirit of that discovery for you to go, oh yeah, I mean, it could have been this. It's like tossing a coin. It isn't like tossing a coin. This is a question that's been argued for 2 centuries and only resolved in the last several decades, and resolved decisively in one side and the other. And the fact that you're not willing to just straight out say, yeah, it is actually an astounding fact that we now know.
No. Look, the scientific method has also revealed to us that the Earth was formed about 4.5 billion years ago. That is much later than the sun. The Old Testament account, the Hebrew Bible account, tells us that it was the other way around. So it got that bit wrong.
All right. So we're... Yes, the Bible is not...
So sometimes it gets things right, sometimes it gets things wrong, you know?
The Bible is not a science. It's not listing out a scientific...
Well, now hold on a second. You can't now move...
See, this is the changing of the goalposts here. And yeah, I mean, I think when we come down to it, what is a common difference between some theists and those that are non-theists, atheists, is let's talk about when the universe was created. I would say, or was it created? I would be very comfortable with saying I don't know for sure. We have we have the Big Bang theory and all that, but we don't know what caused it. Was it possible for there something to be something before it? Is there something beyond what we visibly experience? There's a lot of things that we just don't know, and I think a lot of people in the world, and many of them tend to be theists, they want comfort. They want the security of concrete answers for these questions. Like, we know this, we can move on, and so forth. So that's, I think, a big divergence there. And the other thing here is Alex caught him on something else. So switching the goalposts. So the basic historicity does matter sometimes when it comes to the Bible, and it doesn't other times. And there's a great point by a Christian in the audience. Thank you, JJ Soul, for tuning in and watching. JJ Soul says, as a Christian, Alex is asking good questions. Dinesh is being too dismissive to Alex's questions and points. And they add, I think Dinesh prefers to argue the philological implications rather than the historical claims. And I think what he's doing is he's trying to push the historical claim parts under the rug by saying what matters most is the theological, philosophical stuff, and that it's nitpicking to go into all of this, all of these other things like the staff or the flight from Egypt and all of that. So I have a hard cut coming up for part 1. For any of you who enjoyed this, I really appreciate you watching, and I wanted to say, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll be back for part 2. We're going to finish this debate tomorrow, starting at the same time. So that's tomorrow, Friday, July 5th, 3 p.m. Eastern. I hope you can join me for that. I couldn't find like a very good natural midway point in the debate, so I figured let's just see how it goes, how far I get in, and then we can stop. So I'm going to cover the rest of the debate. So as you can see, there's about 44 minutes. So yeah, we did cover just about half of it. And as we can see from where I paused it, we have a bit of a cliffhanger here. So I'll probably just go back a little bit tomorrow so we can capture the context of all of it. But I think Alex is about to go, gotcha there. And then as you can see, the hand of Dinesh is like, no, you didn't get me. You didn't get me at all. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Let's just see the final result of today's poll. So is the Bible true? Let's see here. Hold on. Is the Bible true? 17% say yes. 60% is the majority winner with no. 60% say no. And depends on what truth means gets 23%. So thank you everyone for watching. Nasheen, thank you for joining as well, and thank you for bringing your friend, Questioning Christian Lip. You can tell Lip that if they want to reach out to me privately, email me or DMing me on Twitter or Instagram. The links for everything are in the video description below. They're free to do so. Thank you so much for watching, Drusilla, JJ Soul. Happy July 4th, Independence Day, to anyone watching from the States. And I'm looking forward to part 2 and seeing what, let's just look at that again. Alex O'Connor, he's got him with something, maybe. Okay. See you tomorrow, everyone. Have a wonderful day.